Chloe Hargrove stood in front of the mirror, the bright lights illuminating her face. She practiced the confident smile she believed everyone expected from her. "Just a little more," she whispered to herself, trying to banish the doubt swirling in her mind. Today was the day her grades would be posted, and with each passing moment, the anticipation grew heavier. The hallway buzzed with chatter as her classmates gathered around, sharing their hopes and fears. "I think I aced English," one girl said, bouncing on her toes. Another chimed in, "I'm sure I failed math. That test was impossible." Chloe listened, trying to focus on their words instead of the mounting pressure she felt. Her family had always set high standards for her, and she could almost hear her mother's voice in her head, reminding her of the importance of success. As the clock ticked closer to the announcement, Chloe felt the weight of expectations pressing down on her. She had always been the star student, the one who could do no wrong. But what if she didn't live up to that image this time? What if she disappointed everyone? When the grades were finally posted, Chloe's stomach dropped. She scanned the list, her heart pounding. And then she saw it, a disappointing mark in history, a subject she thought she had mastered. It felt like a punch in the gut. Anger bubbled up inside her, hot and furious. How could this happen? She thought, her mind racing. In a moment of reckless defiance, she turned to Mrs. Thompson, the dedicated teacher who had always believed in her potential. "You don't understand anything," Chloe shouted, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Without thinking, she spat at Mrs. Thompson, the act shocking everyone around them. Whispers erupted, and eyes widened in disbelief. Chloe felt a rush of adrenaline, but beneath it was a wave of regret. Mrs. Thompson stood frozen for a moment, her expression a mix of disappointment and hurt. "Chloe," she said softly, "I only want what's best for you." But Chloe didn't want to hear it. The thrill of defiance overshadowed the reality of what she had just done. She turned on her heels and pushed through the crowd, leaving the stunned teacher behind. As she walked away, the weight of her actions began to sink in. What had she just done? The thrill of rebellion quickly faded, replaced by a gnawing sense of guilt. The students around her were buzzing, exchanging shocked glances. "Did she really just do that?" one girl whispered. Chloe felt like the center of attention, but not in the way she had hoped. "Are you okay?" a friend asked, concern etched on her face, but the question felt hollow. Chloe shrugged, trying to brush off the incident. I don't know." The words tumbled out, frustration boiling beneath her surface. In the days that followed, Chloe couldn't escape the aftermath of her actions. The school buzzed with gossip, and her peers took sides. Some praised her for standing up against authority, while others condemned her for disrespecting a teacher who had always supported her. Chloe felt isolated, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she wondered if she could ever go back to the way things were. The disappointment in her family's eyes haunted her. "What have I done?" she whispered into the darkness. Questions swirled in her mind. What would Mrs. Thompson say? Would she ever forgive Chloe? And most importantly, how would she face her family now? The weight of her actions pressed down on her, and for the first time, she felt the fragility of her carefully built world. Chloe knew she had to confront the chaos she had created, but where would she even begin? Mrs. Thompson stood at the entrance of the school, her heart fluttering with excitement. It was her first day as a teacher, and she felt a blend of hope and nerves coursing through her. "Today is the day I start making a difference," she whispered to herself, a smile spreading across her face. As she walked down the brightly lit hallway, she could hear the chatter of students, their laughter ringing in her ears. She envisioned inspiring young minds, especially one particular student, Chloe Hargrove. Chloe's world was a different one. As she sat with her friends in the cafeteria, she tossed her hair over her shoulder and laughed at a joke. "Did you see Mrs. Thompson? She thinks she can teach us like we're in kindergarten." Her friends erupted in giggles, but Chloe felt a twinge of something deeper. It was a moment that reminded her of the stark contrast between her life of privilege and Mrs. Thompson's dedication to education. In the quiet of her classroom, Mrs. Thompson recalled her journey to this moment. She had worked hard to earn respect, especially as a female educator in a world that often overlooked women. "I want them to see that learning can change lives," she thought, recalling her struggles in the past. The memories of her own teachers who believed in her flooded back. She hoped to be that guiding light for Chloe and others. Meanwhile, Chloe was wrestling with her emotions after her outburst. As she walked through the school halls, whispers followed her. "Did you see what she did? I can't believe she spit at Mrs. Thompson," one student said, eyes wide with disbelief. Chloe felt a mix of anger and guilt. She had acted out of frustration, but now she was the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. "Why did I do that?" she muttered under her breath as she leaned against a locker, feeling the weight of her classmates' stares. The anger she felt was quickly joined by a pang of regret. It was hard to shake the memory of Mrs. Thompson's shocked expression. Chloe remembered how Mrs. Thompson had always encouraged her, believing in her potential even when she didn't. "Hey Chloe, are you okay?" a friend asked, concern etched on her face. "You really went too far this time." "I know," Chloe replied, a hint of frustration in her voice. "But she just doesn't get what it's like for someone like me. Everyone expects so much." "Maybe she does get it," her friend countered gently. "You don't know her story." As the day wore on, Mrs. Thompson sat in her classroom, reflecting on the incident. She felt the sting of humiliation and disappointment. It was not just about the spit, it was about the deep-seated issues that had led to this moment. "I believed in her," she whispered to herself, her heart heavy. How did it come to this? She thought of her own struggles as a teacher, fighting against stereotypes and proving herself in a male-dominated field. Chloe is not just a spoiled girl, she thought. She is a young woman filled with potential, but she needs to learn empathy and respect. The day ended with the school emptying out, the echoes of laughter fading into silence. Chloe found herself alone in her room, staring at the wall. She felt a mix of emotions swirling inside her, anger, guilt, and a sense of loss. "What have I done?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. As the sun set, casting a warm glow through her window, Chloe picked up her phone. She scrolled through her messages, but none of them offered comfort. She thought of Mrs. Thompson and the role she had played in her life. "I should apologize," she thought, but the thought of facing her teacher made her stomach churn. Meanwhile, Mrs. Thompson prepared for the next day, hoping to find a way to reach Chloe. Everyone deserves a second chance, she reminded herself. She believed that through understanding and compassion, they could bridge the gap created by that moment of anger. With the weight of their worlds resting on their shoulders, both women faced an uncertain future. The path ahead was unclear, but both were determined to confront the challenges that lay before them, unaware of how their lives would intertwine in the days to come. As the dust settled from Chloe's shocking outburst, the elite halls of Crestwood Academy buzzed with gossip. Students whispered in small groups, taking sides like it was a high-stakes game. Some supported Chloe, viewing her as a rebel standing up against authority, while others sided with Mrs. Thompson, feeling her humiliation was unjust. The faculty, too, found themselves divided. Some teachers believed in discipline, while others thought it was time for a change in the way students were treated. In her office, Mrs. Thompson sat, staring blankly at the wall. The sting of humiliation still burned in her chest. She had given her all to her students, especially to Chloe, who had once shown such promise. Now, she felt crushed. "How could she do this to me?" she muttered under her breath. Fueled by a mix of anger and sadness, she decided it was time to confront the school administration. She wanted accountability, not just for herself, but for all teachers who felt disrespected by their students. As she walked down the polished wooden halls towards the principal's office, she felt the weight of every gaze on her. Students paused their conversations, their eyes following her. She took a deep breath and knocked on the principal's door. "Come in," Mr. Jacobs called. She stepped inside, her heart pounding. "Mr. Jacobs, I need to talk to you about Chloe Hargrove," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil inside her. "Of course, Mrs. Thompson. I've heard about the incident. It's quite troubling," he replied, adjusting his glasses as he leaned back in his chair. "I believe we need to address this properly. It's not just about punishment, it's about teaching our students respect," she insisted. "Chloe's actions reflect a larger issue within our school culture." Mr. Jacobs nodded, taking notes. "I understand. But you know how delicate this situation is. Chloe comes from a prominent family. Her parents may not take this lightly. They should be concerned. Their daughter needs to learn that actions have consequences," Mrs. Thompson argued, her passion igniting. "If we let this slide, what message are we sending?" Meanwhile, Chloe sat in the school cafeteria, her mind racing. She had expected her parents to be angry, but their disappointment cut deeper than any punishment could. They didn't raise her to be disrespectful. "Maybe I went too far," she thought, staring at her untouched lunch. Her friend Mia approached, concern etched on her face. "Chloe, are you okay? Everyone is talking about you." "I don't know, Mia. I messed up," Chloe admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I was standing up for myself, but all I did was hurt someone who cared." Mia sat down beside her. "You need to talk to Mrs. Thompson. She's not just a teacher. She believed in you." "I can't face her," Chloe replied, shame washing over her. "What will I even say?" "Just be honest. Everyone makes mistakes," Mia encouraged. "It's how you fix them that matters." Chloe thought about this. She knew she had to face the music, but the thought of seeing Mrs. Thompson again filled her with dread. Later that day, as Chloe walked toward the principal's office to find the courage to apologize, she saw Mrs. Thompson leaving the office. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the world around them faded. "Mrs. Thompson," Chloe called out, her heart pounding. Mrs. Thompson paused, her expression unreadable. "Chloe, I don't think this is a good time." "I need to talk to you," Chloe said, stepping forward. "I messed up. I'm really sorry for what I did. You've always believed in me, and I let my anger take over." Mrs. Thompson crossed her arms, her disappointment evident. "You hurt me, Chloe. It's not just about the spit, it's about respect. You need to understand the weight of your actions." "I know," Chloe replied, her voice trembling. "I've been reflecting on everything. I want to make it right." "Making it right takes more than words," Mrs. Thompson said, her tone firm but softer. "It requires real change, and that begins with understanding what led you to act that way." Chloe nodded, feeling the gravity of the moment. "I want to learn. I want to earn your respect back." Mrs. Thompson's gaze softened slightly. "Then show me. Actions speak louder than words, Chloe." With that, the two women stood in silence, a bridge of understanding slowly beginning to form between them, though the path ahead would be long and uncertain. As the school year moved on, Chloe Hargrove felt like a shadow of her former self. Once surrounded by friends, she now walked the halls alone, her laughter replaced by silence. The whispers of her classmates followed her like a dark cloud, each word a reminder of the scandal she had caused. She had always been known for her charm and poise, but now she faced a world where her identity seemed tied only to her family's wealth and status. One afternoon, after a long day of feeling the weight of eyes on her, Chloe found herself standing outside Mrs. Thompson's classroom. She had thought about this moment a lot. It was time to confront her mistakes head on. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. "Mrs. Thompson," Chloe's voice was softer than she had intended. Mrs. Thompson looked up from her desk, her expression unreadable. "Chloe, what brings you here?" Chloe hesitated, feeling the familiar knot in her stomach. "I wanted to talk, to apologize for what I did." Mrs. Thompson crossed her arms, her gaze steady. "Apologies are a start, but they are not enough. You need to earn respect, Chloe. It does not come easy." Chloe felt the sting of those words. "I know that now. I was wrong. I let my anger take over. I didn't think about how it would affect you." Mrs. Thompson's expression softened slightly, but the challenge in her eyes remained. Why were you so angry? Was it just the grade? Chloe took a step forward, her vulnerability breaking through. I thought I had worked so hard. I wanted to make my family proud, but it all felt like too much. I felt trapped. Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly, understanding the weight of expectations. I understand that pressure. I faced my own struggles. People often see the privilege you have, but they don't see the hard work behind it. I had to fight to be respected as a teacher. Chloe listened intently, realizing that there was more to Mrs. Thompson than she had known. What do you mean? What struggles did you face? Mrs. Thompson leaned back in her chair, recalling her early days in the profession. When I first started teaching, many didn't take me seriously because I was a woman. I had to prove myself every single day. It was exhausting, but it taught me humility and strength. Chloe felt a shift in the room. I never thought about it that way. I thought I had it tough, but you really fought for what you believed in. A silence settled between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Chloe felt a flicker of hope. Can we start over? I want to learn from you. I want to earn your respect. Mrs. Thompson regarded Chloe with a mix of skepticism and curiosity. It won't be easy. You must show me you are committed to change. I will, Chloe replied, determination rising within her. I want to work hard, to learn what truly matters. Can you help me? Mrs. Thompson considered her words for a moment before nodding. Very well. Come by after school tomorrow and we will begin. But remember, this is a journey. You must be willing to face your own challenges. Chloe felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I promise to give it my all. As she left the classroom, the tension between them had eased slightly. Chloe realized that understanding was beginning to blossom between her and Mrs. Thompson. They were two women from different worlds, but perhaps their experiences could connect them in ways she had never imagined. The next day, as Chloe walked into Mrs. Thompson's classroom, she felt a sense of purpose. She was ready to face her challenges and learn the value of humility and hard work. With each step, Chloe began to see that her identity was not just defined by her family's wealth, but by her willingness to grow and change. The journey ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful about what lay ahead. Chloe stood outside Mrs. Thompson's classroom, her heart racing. She had spent the last few days thinking about what happened. The anger she felt was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Fear. Fear of disappointing her family again. Fear of failing, and fear of facing Mrs. Thompson. Taking a deep breath, she pushed the door open. Mrs. Thompson looked up from her desk, her face a mix of surprise and caution. Chloe, she said, her voice steady. What brings you here? I want to learn, Chloe replied, her voice barely above a whisper. I need your help. Mrs. Thompson paused, her eyes searching Chloe's. You really mean that? Yes, Chloe affirmed, the determination in her voice surprising even herself. I want to improve. I want to do better in your class. All right, Mrs. Thompson said, her tone softening. But it won't be easy. You'll have to put in the work. Chloe nodded, relief washing over her. They agreed to meet for extra tutoring sessions after school. As the days passed, Chloe found herself looking forward to these sessions. Each time they met, she felt the walls around her heart begin to crack. During their sessions, Mrs. Thompson would teach while also sharing stories about her own experiences. One afternoon, as Chloe struggled with a difficult history concept, Mrs. Thompson leaned back in her chair and said, You know, I wasn't always a great student. I had to work hard for everything I have. Chloe looked up, surprised. Really? But you're so good at teaching. I thought you had it all figured out. Mrs. Thompson chuckled softly. Not at all. I faced a lot of challenges. I had to prove myself as a woman in a male-dominated field. It took time, but I learned that hard work and humility matter more than anything else. Chloe listened intently. I guess I've always thought that being perfect was the only way to make my family proud, but it feels exhausting. Perfection is a heavy burden to carry, Mrs. Thompson said gently. It's okay to be flawed. It's okay to ask for help. As their bond grew, Chloe began to share her own struggles. My parents have these huge expectations, she admitted one day, her voice trembling. I feel like I'm never enough for them. Mrs. Thompson nodded, understanding in her eyes. You are enough, Chloe. You have to believe that. You are more than your grades or your family's wealth. Chloe took a moment to let the words sink in. For the first time, she felt seen not just as the perfect student, but as a person with her own fears and dreams. As they continued to work together, Chloe suggested organizing a school event to showcase students' talents. It could be a way for everyone to shine, not just the grades, she proposed excitedly. Mrs. Thompson smiled at the idea. That's a wonderful thought. Let's make it happen. With Mrs. Thompson's guidance, Chloe poured her heart into planning the event. She reached out to her classmates, encouraging them to share their skills, whether it was singing, painting, or even sharing a story. On the day of the event, Chloe stood backstage, her heart pounding. She watched as her peers showcased their talents, their smiles lighting up the room. When it was her turn, she took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. Hi, everyone, she began, her voice shaky but resolute. I'm Chloe, and I want to thank Mrs. Thompson for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. The audience fell silent as she continued. I learned that it's not about being perfect. It's about trying and being true to who you are. After her speech, the room erupted in applause. Chloe felt a rush of warmth and acceptance wash over her. She had earned their respect, not through perfection, but through honesty and vulnerability. As the event came to an end, Mrs. Thompson approached Chloe with a proud smile. You did an amazing job today. You've grown so much. Thank you, Mrs. Thompson, Chloe replied, her eyes shining with gratitude. I couldn't have done it without you. In that moment, they both understood that their journey together was just beginning, a journey built on mutual respect, understanding, and the courage to embrace their true selves. The day of the school assembly arrived, buzzing with excitement and a hint of anxiety. Chloe Hargrove stood backstage, her heart racing as she waited for her turn to speak. The auditorium was filled with her classmates, teachers, and parents, all eager to hear what she had to say. She took a deep breath, reminding herself of the journey she had taken, the lessons she had learned. When her name was called, Chloe stepped into the spotlight. The bright lights made it hard to see the faces in the audience, but she could feel their eyes on her. She adjusted the microphone, her voice shaking slightly as she began. Hello everyone, I know many of you are here because of what happened earlier this year. I want to talk about that. The room fell silent, every ear tuned to her words. Not long ago, I was lost. I thought I had to be perfect and show everyone that I could succeed without help, but I was wrong. Chloe paused, letting her words sink in. I made a terrible mistake when I disrespected Mrs. Thompson, who only wanted to help me. From the audience, Mrs. Thompson watched with pride. She remembered the girl who had once acted out of anger, and now she saw a young woman taking responsibility for her actions. Chloe continued, I thought I was better than others because of my family's name, but I am not just my last name. I am a person who has made mistakes and learned from them. Chloe's voice grew stronger as she shared her journey. Through my time with Mrs. Thompson, I learned about hard work, respect, and empathy. She taught me that everyone has a story and struggles of their own. I learned that it is okay to ask for help and that true strength lies in admitting when you are wrong. The audience listened intently, moved by her honesty. Chloe glanced at Mrs. Thompson, who smiled encouragingly. I want to say sorry to Mrs. Thompson and to anyone I hurt with my actions. I know now that I need to treat everyone with kindness, no matter their background. After a moment of silence, Chloe added, Empathy is important. We never know what someone else is going through. I promise to do better, not just for myself, but for everyone around me. She felt a weight lift off her shoulders as she finished her speech. Thank you for listening. As she stepped down from the stage, the applause erupted. Chloe felt a wave of relief wash over her. She had faced her past, and now she felt free. Mrs. Thompson approached her, her eyes shining with tears of happiness. Chloe, that was beautiful, she said, wrapping her arms around the girl. You have grown so much. Chloe smiled, feeling the warmth of the moment. I couldn't have done it without you, Mrs. Thompson. Thank you for believing in me. They found a quiet corner of the auditorium, away from the crowd. I am proud of you, Chloe, Mrs. Thompson said softly. You have shown a level of maturity that is rare. This is just the beginning of your journey, and I am excited to see where it will take you. Chloe nodded, her heart full. I realize now that I want to help others too. I want to be someone who inspires, just like you do. Mrs. Thompson smiled. You already are. Remember, it's not about where you come from, but where you choose to go from here. As they spoke, they both felt a shift in their relationship. It was no longer just teacher and student. It was two individuals who had learned from each other. Chloe had embraced humility, and Mrs. Thompson felt renewed in her mission to inspire her students. In that moment, Chloe reflected on the power of empathy and the importance of understanding one another. She had learned that facing one's past could lead to redemption and personal growth. And for Mrs. Thompson, it was a reminder that every student had the potential to change, to grow, and to find their own path. Together, they walked out of the auditorium, ready to face the future, knowing that they had each other's support. Share this story if you believe that growth and empathy can transform lives. Leave a comment about a time when you learned from your mistakes, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this one.